Well, what's up, my man? How you doing?
Oh, you know how it is. It's another Token and Hobbs Tuesday.
Absolutely. I didn't get through your entire episode that you did on Friday night. I think I got through the first 2 hours of it, but it's good. It was a good conversation. I gotta remind myself to listen to the episodes that you do without me on Fridays more often. Because when I get in the car and I listen to them, I'm like, this is some good shit. I'm glad we're making these episodes.
yeah. It's always good when I have the Book Boys on TBL in North Carolina.
Yeah, and here's the funny thing: when you actually talk to these book boys, it immediately dispels a lot of the myths you see going around in the media these days, and you see it from just normies on the internet too. You know, people who they don't know what book boys are all about. They think we're just violent, crazy people who just want to go around and start a revolution for no good reason. Like, no, they really don't, though. And if you listen to them, they want to bend over backwards to avoid that. Like, yeah.
These are guys they're not your typical just idiots with guns that the media wants to portray them as. These are guys they're educated, they know their history, they know that this country was birthed in bloody revolution, and they know how terrible that sort of thing is, and they're doing everything they can to avoid that sort of situation from happening again. But they are prepared in the event that it should happen. And I think that the problem that the media sees is they see these guys with their tactical gear and their guns, and they immediately conflate preparation with anticipation and accelerationism. And that's just simply not the case.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing. A lot of I see this especially in like ANCOMs. They talk about we need a violent revolution all the time. Like, do you really want a violent revolution? Because you know what that means, right? Everyone wants a revolution until it's time to live in a revolutionary country. Nobody wants to live in a revolutionary country.
No.
Right? And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what revolution. Revolutions fucking suck while you're living in them. And here's the thing. You might win, but it'll cost you a lot. Like what are some of the examples people like to use about, citizen militias mostly fighting off well-armed militaries, right? What are some of the examples people like to use? They like to use Afghanistan. They like to use Vietnam. Afghanistan again, right?
Yeah.
What they don't. But here's the thing that they fail to understand is, yeah, Vietnam won, right? But you know how devastated their country was. You know how many people died in Vietnam due to that war. Like, yeah, sure, they won. They kicked the Frenchies out. They kicked us out. They got their own country. Sure, yeah, that was a victory for Vietnam. But they also lost like 1 million people in the process.
Right.
They also had their cities burned to the ground and their infrastructure reduced to nothing. You see, yeah, you might win, but that's not something you want. You don't actually want to have to fight that battle.
Right. Especially when you're going up against a force like the U.S. military. The U.S. military is absolutely terrible at low intensity conflicts, insurgencies, and things like that. But the U.S. military is top notch at killing people and breaking their shit. Like best in the world. It's great. It's a great military. Fantastic. Absolutely great. Probably the best ever. Yeah, when it comes to like blowing up buildings and killing a lot of people very quickly, there's no beating the U.S. military, and that's not the type of foe that you want to go up against, because even if you are able to drag it out for 20 years and then end up winning, the casualty numbers are going to be so lopsided, the infrastructure is going to be so thoroughly destroyed that it's beyond a Pyrrhic victory. It's what was the point almost. Now, granted, Vietnam bounced back, and now they're a manufacturing hub. We get a lot of stuff from Vietnam. They're on friendly terms, more or less, with us and their neighbors, and you can come back from that. But they're on the other side of the planet, and the U.S. military laid waste to it.
And they're on the other side of that conflict now. Their children and grandchildren are reaping the benefits.
Right.
But they, at the time, suffered immensely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you want to avoid, right? That's why it's important to remind people that Boogaloo Boys aren't looking for a fight. They're looking for liberty. And they see a fight as a possibility, as something that might have to happen in order to gain liberty, right? It's a means to an end, right? That's how everyone should view violence and things like revolutions, right? It's a means. It's not an end unto itself. You don't want a revolution for its own sake. You want it in order to achieve a tangible goal.
And you want to be able to avoid it if you can.
Exactly. And which is why it's very important, why you shouldn't jump on any old revolutionary movement that pops up and say, oh, this is it. We'll just jump in on this one and steer it in the right direction. Nah, that's not what you want. If you're going to jump on board some revolutionary action, you better make goddamn sure that it's going to go in the direction you want it to go. Speaking of which, what's going on in Seattle with the Chaz right now?
The Chaz.
That's what I wanted to talk about. I figured I'd kind of segue our way into that. But this
some
looks
some other names for the Chaz that I've heard is Chazistan. Let me pull the rest of them up here. Chazistan. Where'd it go? Chazistan, Somalia.
That's a good one.
Veganzuela.
I like that.
Tofu Dishu, and this one that just popped up in my other little group chat here that I absolutely it's got me rolling is the Soviet Union.
The Soviet Union. Oh my god. Well, see, here's the thing about the Chaz. I don't even think they're calling it Chaz anymore. No. I think they changed the name
to the Chop.
That's a bummer. Why the fuck would you change the name?
I think they probably watched my episode on Friday and said that these guys are having way too much fun calling it the Chaz.
I think, they probably called it Chapel Hill Autonomous Zone without even thinking about what the acronym spelled out.
All right.
And then everyone started calling them Chaz, and they're like, well, that sounds stupid. They'll think we're silly.
Yeah. So now they call it the CHOP, and that stands for Capitol Hill Occupy Protest.
But that doesn't make what? The Occupy protest. So now they're not an autonomous zone anymore. They're just protesters who put up barricades.
Right. I think they figured out that the word autonomous means self-sustaining, and they figured out that they not going to last till the end of the week without outside resources coming in. Which,
they can't.
Yeah,
it's not possible.
They are. That's the sad thing is that I watched a video of a guy walking around during the day, and they're just tables and tables of donated food and clothes and like sleeping bags and tents. So people from Seattle are supporting this, unfortunately, because they're ideological fellow travelers with these yahoos. But yeah, so they realized that the word autonomous means that they needed to be self-sustaining. They weren't going to be self-sustaining, so they were getting foreign aid in essence. And since it was just 6 city blocks, everybody's talking about, oh, they need to send in the military, or they need to send in the federal marshals or law enforcement or blah blah blah. I'm like, if they wanted to be treated like a foreign country, just set up a border checkpoint, put customs and border patrol around this little 6-block area. Nothing gets in and nobody gets out without a passport, and see how long it is before they're like, okay, please annex us again, United States.
that's the funny thing about it, and it's kind of funny seeing the way libertarians have reacted to Chaz or Chop, as it were. I guess a lot of people are jumping. There were people on our Facebook page going, "Oh, well, they've done more than the Boogaloo Boys," and you guys made this point in your episode. Like, they didn't do anything. The city let them do it.
Exactly.
Right. This thing wouldn't exist had they not have the go ahead from the city of Seattle.
Yeah.
Right? It wouldn't have happened. Sorry, it would never have happened.
Right, and the go-ahead wasn't even like wink and a nod implied. Like the day after that, the mayor of Seattle comes out and says, "Oh, the Chaz has always existed. The Capitol Hill area has always been a place where people can freely go and express themselves." And it's like, yeah, they literally just got the thumbs up from local government. The police chief was ordered to stand down. You know, this wasn't a hostile takeover, regardless of what Warlord Raz and his posse did. But
Raz.
An F-tier SoundCloud rapper and his armed posse dealing guns out of the back of a Tesla that he's somehow got somewhere. No, this is the and when people say like, oh, they accomplished more than the Boogaloo Boys ever did, it's like, what, paint themselves into a corner? If they didn't have the explicit permission of the local government and the police forces there, they would have been mopped up within the hour with, some of them would have had their blood shed quite hastily. But B, they would have been starved out almost immediately because there was absolutely no prep and planning other than the obvious planning that went into, and the coordination that went into actually like securing their little border area there. That was suspiciously well planned, but for the long term, they had nothing there. So they literally painted themselves into a corner, and it's like, yeah, that's what I aspire to do right there. Way to go.
Yeah, they're relying on donated Domino's pizza to survive, and a pathetic attempt at farming, if I do say so myself. I mean, I'm no farmer, right? I've never grown shit in my life. But something tells me that laying down topsoil on top of cardboard and planting potatoes is not going to work out for you.
No.
Like, potatoes are roots, right? I'm pretty sure potatoes are roots.
Yes.
Which means they have to go into the ground, right? That's how roots work. They go into the ground, but you put cardboard between the potato and the ground.
Right. The cardboard thing, my old lady looked it up because she's getting into gardening and figuring stuff out about that. The cardboard thing, you're supposed to lay it down in like late fall or early winter before the first snow, and what it does is it kills the grass, and then it decomposes and breaks down into compost, and that moist cardboard holds moisture really well for when you eventually do plant your plants in the now grassless composted area. It's not something you do over the course of a weekend. It's something you do over a season and a half.
So basically, they looked up some instructions on farming off of Google, and step one was cardboard. Yeah. And they didn't. They just read, lay down some cardboard, and there's like, done.
Yep.
There it is, cardboard. Yep. And then they put down the soil because they knew they looked at the cardboard and they're like, that's not right. We got to put some dirt on it. They put dirt on it. Like, one last step. And then they put some potted plants on top of the dirt, and that's their autonomous farm. They're going to feed 6 blocks worth of people with this little farm. I mean, I guess I got to commend them for trying. I mean, I wouldn't have expected them to even try to make a farm. But as I'm looking at this, and like, can't you just rip up the grass?
Well, the thing is that apparently this area is a former site of a chemical plant, and the ground is tainted with arsenic. So,
Oh.
so they're kind of asked out either way. And I just wanted to, in case there's any of them watching right now, I just wanted to point out that the miracle in Miracle Grow topsoil does not indicate an actual literal miracle. You are going to have to put some work into this.
It's just they're waiting for a literal miracle. And it is kind of interesting to see how libertarians react to this, because a lot have been saying that this is something libertarians should get behind and support. I'm like, nah, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm not going to get behind this stupid nonsense and support it. For one thing, I don't think any of these people in CHOP now. Can we just call it Chaz? CHOP is
I just want to
CHOP is
call
a
it one of
stupid
the.
name.
I just want to call it one of the derogatory names, like
Soymalia. Let's do no.
or Veganzuela.
What was the Soviet Union? I doubt any of the leaders within the Soviet Union are anywhere near what you and I would be ideologically. These aren't libertarians, right? That's not what these people are. And despite what Antifa apologists will tell you all day long, simply being against fascism isn't enough to get you into their little Antifa club, right? What the way they trick you is they'll say, oh, if you're against fascism, then you're Antifa too. Join us. And you're like, okay, I'm a libertarian. Can you join us? No, libertarians are fascists.
Yeah.
That's how that works.
And then in the same breath, they'll tell you that, oh, no, Antifa's not an actual entity. It's a sentiment. There is no leadership structure. There is no organization called Antifa. It's like, okay, fucking pick one, please.
Like, oh yeah, just because there isn't like a national organization with like one guy on the top of a hierarchy, you expect me to think that none of these Antifa groups are planned or organized.
Yeah, spoiler alert, they are.
Yeah, no shit they are. I mean, you do not get these planned protests without some organization. And when you're organizing, guess what you have? An organization. Yes, Antifa is an organization. It's not one organization, right? That's not how cells work. Right? It's not one thing. It's multiple organizations that all call themselves Antifa or some variation of it. And guess what? They are not accepting of you, libertarians. They are not accepting of any ideology outside. They're not even accepting of each other. You ever listen to communists fight with each other? It's fucking horrible. You think libertarians are bad at infighting? Just wait till you listen to some of a fucking Maoist fight a Leninist. Like, what the fuck are you guys talking about? But yeah, they hate each other. These guys don't like each other either.
And the root of it is that they hate themselves. And for any
they should.
Yeah. And the root of it is, though, for any libertarians, I think that they might have common cause with these people, is just to remember that when the Berkeley riots blew up a couple of years ago, when like Ben Shapiro and Milo Yiannopoulos were supposed to speak at UBerkeley, and then they got ran off. These are the same people that painted a hammer and sickle on the wall with "liberals get the bullet too." So if they're not, if they're brazen enough to put that out there, they are going to put you up against the wall the first chance that they get.
Right. And here's the thing: when they're talking about liberals getting the wall, they're not talking. You're not only talking about people like Nancy Pelosi or Joe Biden. They're talking about liberals in the classical sense.
Mm-hmm.
They're not talking about an American political faction, which is what people use the word liberal for now, right? But liberalism is what our founding fathers were, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were liberals. That's what the French revolutionaries were. They were liberals, right? That's what the provisional government that took over Russia in the fall of the Tsar, they were liberals. All these different factors, these are all liberal these are all liberals following a liberal ideology. It's usually pro-market. It's usually defending negative rights, right? Basic human liberties and political freedoms. That's what liberalism is in the classical sense. So when they say liberals get the rope too, they're essentially talking about almost everybody in America, right?
Yep.
Because guess what? Republicans and Democrats are both liberals in the classical sense, right? Now, they're not the same kind of liberals that the founders were, obviously, right? But it's still the same tradition. It's still the same classical liberal tradition, right?
Yeah,
So when they say liberals get the rope, they mean like everybody who isn't them.
Yeah,
But you know what happens
when
when communists take over a country? They hang the liberals and they hang each other.
Mm-hmm. They hang the counter-revolutionaries, then they hang the liberals, and they hang the allies, and then they end up hanging each other or starving themselves to death. Whichever comes first.
That's how you end up. And that's why every communist country in existence always turned into a dictatorship and always starves its own people. Happens literally every time.
Yeah,
right?
so one of our guys over here in the corner, he says the Paris Commune they compared themselves to initially included secret trials to put people with dissenting opinions to death. Plus, they burned the Louvre when they got run out. That's one of the reasons why they started calling themselves the Chop. One of the guys was caught on camera saying something like, "Just like the French Revolution, if you were a dissenter or a counter-revolutionary, they chopped your head off."
None of these people in Chaz have the balls to do anything so radical. Like when people say they're LARPing, that's exactly what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
The French revolutionaries didn't just cordon off a 6-block cordon and say, "Hey, send us pizza." That's not what they did. All right.
They not baguette.
Do some reading on the French Revolution. The French Revolution was fucking bloody as shit, right? And they used and revolutionary mobs ruled the day. It's not what's going on in Chaz, right? None of these people have the balls to do anything, and the only reason they're allowed to do any of this is because their city lets them do it. They don't. It's not like they're resisting something. It's not like they're fighting everything. They got their little corner, and the city government's just sort of in their corner, going, "All right, we're just gonna let them do this."
I've got this image in my head of what happened in the morning brief in the White House when they brought Trump the daily presidential brief. It's like, "Sir, we've got this situation in Seattle. Okay, let's see it." And then he's like flipping through the tablet or whatever, and he's like, "Sure, sir, we've got the Seattle PD is regrouped. We've got federal marshals, and we've got the National Guard on standby." No. Let's see where this goes.
I want to see. I want to see where this goes. Yeah,
I want to see where this goes.
Troy says at least Puerto Ricans had the balls to build a guillotine and march it to the governor's mansion. I'm tell you right now, the governor in Puerto Rico probably deserves to get his head cut off with a guillotine.
Yeah,
not gonna lie.
Yeah, that's Troy. He's the guy that I work with. Hi, Troy.
Yeah, I mean, if you think that U.S. states are badly governed, just wait until you get into some of the shit that Puerto Ricans put Puerto Rico through. All right, the Puerto Rican politicians are the worst politicians in America, and you never hear about them because they're not in America. They're out in the Caribbean, having their own banana republic, and it's fucking awful. And it's probably the main reason why Puerto Ricans never vote for independence.
Yeah. We talked about Puerto Rico a little bit. I don't know if you got to that part in our Friday show.
I didn't.
We talked about like the state of Jefferson. Somebody in the comments asked like why the state of Jefferson, which is like Northern California and parts of Idaho and Oregon, why that never took off. And we got into the discussion like that would give conservatives 2 more senators in the Senate and unknown number of representatives, and then the Democrats would probably come back with, well, if you guys are going to have a new state with all this, then we're going to and I just use the example of making Puerto Rico the 52nd state just to kind of even things out. And then we got talking about, it's like, Puerto Rico should either be cut loose to be its own country or be admitted, because people like them, Guam, the Virgin Islands, American Samoa, them being like territories with all of our restrictions and none of the benefits is kind of a shit deal for them.
It's really not, though. I'm telling you, independence would be horrible because I just told you how bad the politicians in Puerto Rico are. They would run it into the fucking ground. And if Puerto Rico became a state, it would immediately become the highest tax state in the country. Right now, Puerto Ricans pay the lowest tax rate because they don't have to pay any federal taxes. But their Puerto Rican taxes are incredibly high compared to other states. So if you add federal taxes on top of there, Puerto Ricans, when Puerto Rico is already primarily poor. That's why so many rich people are going to Puerto Rico and so many poor people are leaving it. Right? It's a weird conundrum. But if Puerto Rico became an independent country, its politicians would run it into the ground. If it became a state, it'd be the highest tax state in the country, and it'd be almost impossible for poor people to live there anymore. So where it's at now is kind of the best place for it to be politically, as sad as that sounds. And I know it sounds sad, but that's kind of where Puerto Rico is at right now. So, I mean, if they cut it loose, it'd probably turn into like the Dominican Republic pretty fast.
Well, Dominican Republic's not that bad. I was in the army with a guy, and he says Dominican Republic's not bad. He's like, you want to see a shithole? Go next door to Haiti.
Oh yeah, Haiti's another one of those countries that had a revolution and never recovered from it.
Yeah,
I mean, it's out of all the revolutions in history, Haiti probably had the most justification to revolt, though, because I don't know if you guys know the history of Haiti. That was a slave revolt. It was the only successful slave revolt in history in the Western Hemisphere. They fucking kicked the Frenchies out and never let them back in. Even Napoleon couldn't get them back. Yeah. But yeah, it's kind of been a shit show ever since. But,
yeah, well, they burned the sugar plantations down, and that was the only product that they had, and they never recovered from that. And
yeah,
that was the thing I was asking my Dominican friend. I was like, aren't they on the same island? Isn't the only difference between the Dominican Republic and Haiti an imaginary line in the dirt? And he's like, oh no, that line is very real. And there are people in guard towers that make sure that nobody crosses it. He's like, my dad's a Dominican border guard, and he has shot many people trying to cross the border.
Yeah, Haiti is always. I mean, if you guys like to get a rundown on these kind of things, there's a podcast I very much enjoy listening to called the Revolutions Podcast. And the guy on it, he's the guy that did the history of Rome. I think his name is Mike Duncan. And he goes through various revolutions throughout history. He started with the English Civil War, he did the American Revolution, he did the French Revolution, he did the Haitian Revolution, revolutions of 1848, the Mexican Revolution, which I didn't even know was a thing. I didn't even know the whole story behind that, but that was a lot of fun. But if you want to know all about that, then that's definitely a podcast you want to listen to. But usually talking about they burned down their sugar plantations, I can't really blame them for that because, one, these are former slaves. And if you know anything about slavery in the Caribbean, it was absolutely brutal. I mean, you think slavery in the United States was bad, and it was horrible. Slavery in the Caribbean on sugar plantations was about 100 times worse. Mm-hmm. Right? The life expectancy for a slave on a sugar plantation was like a year. I mean, it gets cultivating sugar. It's very profitable. You make a lot of money doing it, but it's one of the most backbreaking menial labor jobs you can have. It is very difficult. It is very painful. It is very exhausting. And when you're forced to do it in an unfamiliar climate with unfamiliar diseases all around you, day in and day out being worked to death, yeah, I can't really blame them for burning down every single sugar plantation once they got their hands on them. Very, very bad stuff.
Yeah, and then in hindsight, that was the only skill that they had, and they kind of had to try and rebuild the country from the ground up and had nothing that they knew how to do. Right. That's, unfortunately, the life of a slave is you're made to do one thing.
Yeah, and it also doesn't help that earthquakes and hurricanes are constantly hitting that island. And Haiti has a bad history of dictators and the U.S. intervening in very inopportune times in the island as well. So, yeah, Haiti, that's some of the reason why Haiti's a shit show. But this podcast isn't about that. This is not the history of Haiti podcast.
Or other small Caribbean islands.
Yeah, I mean, interesting history stuff. Again, if you want to know more about the history of Haiti, then Revolutions podcast, very good stuff. Place for you to go. Okay, moving on to different news. I did want to talk a little bit about Mayor de Blasio over in New York and what he's doing right now in regards to coronavirus and the Black Lives Matter protests that have been going on.
Ooh, lad.
Oh my goodness, de Blasio is just the worst kind of human being. So here's the deal. We all have seen de Blasio marching in the Black Lives Matter protest, doing his thing, encouraging them, being like, yeah, go out, protest, all this good stuff, which I'm not opposed to because I'm not a COVID Karen, right? I think people should. I think people have the right to protest and shouldn't be shamed for doing it, regardless of their reasons for doing it, whether it's to protest police brutality or protest the fact that their jobs and livelihoods have been destroyed. These are both very good reasons to protest, even when the government tells you not to. The problem I have is then when you go around telling people that they should go protest and then enforce draconian lockdown orders on other people, right? This strikes me of hypocrisy a little bit. That's the word for it, right? Hypocrisy is what we got here. So we got a story out of New York where where New York City workers were literally welding playgrounds shut in primarily Jewish neighborhoods. Like, apparently the playgrounds in New York are surrounded by fences, and they would weld the fences shut so that no little Jewish kids could go play on the playground, because you can't have kids playing outside unless they're in a protest, and that's totally fine. You totally let that go on.
This is the same guy, or was it Cuomo, the governor? I forget which one, but when the Orthodox Jewish community in New York City said that they were still going to hold their services, he said something that was very, very Hitler-esque, and a lot of people dragged him for it. So is he just like secretly got a hard-on for Jews, or what's going on with this guy?
He might. It's a funny thing. I mean, when it turned out that people who were enforcing lockdown orders were enforcing those orders primarily on Black and Hispanic people, the New York government lost their shit. They're like, oh, we can't have this. This isn't good. We can't have our lockdown orders disproportionately affect minority groups. What was that? You said the minority group was Jewish? Oh, fuck those guys. We need to go after them. We can't. It's funny how the Jewish community always seems to be left out of these social justice hierarchies. Them and Asians, they always seem to get left out of these things, even though they're smaller minorities than Blacks and Hispanics.
Well, it's because the social justice people are Marxists at heart, and the modern social justice hierarchy, where blacks are more oppressed than Hispanics, but a Hispanic woman is more oppressed than a black man, and all of the shuffling around of the progressive stack is Marxist oppressor-oppressed relationships applied to race and gender as opposed to economic class, because they figured out back in the 60s that you're not going to get a class-based Marxist revolution in this country because wealth and success in this country is so fluid. Anybody can make it. Now, in the old world, in Europe, if you were born rich, you were probably going to stay rich, and if you were born poor, you were probably going to stay poor, because that's just the way the class structure and the hierarchy worked. But over here, we had a more free market, and they realized that they've got to apply that critical theory to something other than economic class. So in the 60s, you had like Bill Ayers and the Weather Underground and all of these other people that were trying to kickstart a Marxist revolution and realized they couldn't do it. So they just applied the oppressor-oppressed narrative to race and gender and sexuality as opposed to economic class.
Yeah, and it's also because this whole thing is a bid for political support, right? And it's hard to tell Jewish and Asian communities, oh, you're oppressed, you're oppressed, you're oppressed. You need to join us politically, because there's very successful communities.
Yeah.
Right? Asian Americans make more money than white Americans.
Yeah, that's where I was going with the whole oppressor oppressed thing. Is it was just like, you can't say that to Asians and Jews, because on average, Ashkenazi Jews and almost every single variety of Asian is above the median white household income
That's
across the
part of
board.
that white privilege. You got that Asian privilege and that Jewish privilege. I mean, it's funny because out of all these communities, if you're talking about worldwide and historical wide, the Jewish community has probably been the most oppressed single ethnic group in the entire world, right? I mean, it from the from the days of the Babylonians to the modern day, the Jewish community has just been beaten down over and over and over again by so many different people in so many different places. I mean, as someone who enjoys history and will seek out books and podcasts and lectures on different periods in time in history, it amazes me how, like, no matter what time period you study, no matter what location you study, everyone hates the Jews. No matter where. It's like, guys, people, leave them alone already. Like, the Jews were blamed for the Black Death. They're blamed for every war that's ever happened. Right? If a child slips and falls down a well, that's the Jews did it. Right? Like, the Jews were blamed for the Arabs taking the Holy Land. It's like if any ethnic group would have an excuse of historical systematic oppression holding them back, it would be the Jewish community, and yet they're one of the most successful in the entire world. Just goes to show you that, even an oppressed group can be incredibly successful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, and then the people that blame them for everything and say that they're like an inferior race. It's like they either control everything or they're inferior. They can't be both. These are mutually exclusive ideologies that you're trying to mash together here, guys. So that's silliness.
Well, yeah, and if the idea is that they control everything, you think they'd be more effective in not allowing these atrocities to be done to them.
Yeah.
Right? So clearly they don't control everything, and they never did.
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems a little ridiculous to say, oh, like, these people control everything. That's why there's so many massacres against them. Like, if they controlled everything, you'd be the one being massacred, dude.
Yeah.
Not them. If they controlled everything, you wouldn't be around anymore. So clearly they don't. Clearly there's something else going on here. But yeah, to get back to our original point about de Blasio, it's pretty ridiculous. It's pretty ridiculous that people across the country are still trying to enforce these draconian lockdown measures, even as they openly encourage mass protests of thousands and thousands of people marching up and down city streets.
Mm-hmm.
That you can't have it both ways. I'm sorry, you cannot have it both ways. Either we all have to stay indoors in order to keep this virus from spreading, or we don't. You can't have this stupid middle ground where you go like, oh, well, if the cause is just enough, if the cause is just, then you can go out and do whatever you want. But if you just want your children to play outside in the sun, how dare you? We're going to weld the playground shut. We're going to force you to stay inside because your children's well-being isn't as important as letting thousands of people march it up and down the streets.
Yep. And on that note, one of the stories I think you sent to our chat today for us to discuss was that in the orders about contact tracing and stopping the spread and everything, either de Blasio or Governor Cuomo ordered that contact tracers not ask anybody that they contact trace about participation in the Black Lives Matter protests. The only reason for that is if there is a second wave or another spike, they don't want to be able to attribute it to the protests. That's simply all there is. Now, we heard all of these stories from various states that had anti-lockdown protests that there was a spike like 2 days after the initial protest, which told me that either A, there was no spike and you're full of shit, or B, because the incubation period was anywhere from 3 days to 3 weeks, there is a spike, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the anti-lockdown protests, and you're still full of shit. So what they're wanting to do here is absolve the Black Lives Matter protests of any complicity in a possible second spike of the coronavirus, which hey, it's probably not coming.
Yeah, and it's really because it's so blatantly hypocritical, and they don't even try to. They don't even try to hide it. Like when Republicans switched from being, oh yeah, we need to bomb every country in the Middle East, to being like, oh, maybe we shouldn't do that anymore. It took them years to switch over to that point of view. Like in the course of 3 weeks, Democrats have gone from everyone must stay inside to everyone must go outside to everyone that we like has to stay outside, but everyone we don't like has to. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. This is like that scene in 1984 when they finally get Winston Smith to crack and admit that 2 + 2 = 5, and then they keep torturing him, and he's like, "What are you doing? I said that 2 + 2 = 5," and they're like, "Mr. Smith, we don't want you to say that 2 + 2 = 5. We want you to believe it." And that's the kind of mind game that they're playing here, with these constant switch ups, just like at the turn of a dime. It's you got to stay inside. No, you got to go out and protest because it's for a righteous cause. Oh, there's a second spike in COVID, but it has nothing to do with our protests. They just want to break us mentally into thinking the way that they think.
Yeah, and it's a form of discrimination too, right? To enforce lockdowns against religious institutions, churches, mosques, synagogues, but not enforce them against political activism is a form of discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
This is a blatant violation of the First Amendment. If you're going to enforce lockdown orders, they have to be consistent and applied equally across the board to everyone. You cannot simply say it is okay to protest this, but not that. It is okay to have hundreds of people at this guy's funeral, but you can't have 10 people at your mom's funeral, right? That is not okay. Right? And yeah, there were hundreds of people at the George Floyd funeral, and I have no problem with that. None whatsoever. You know who should have a problem with that? Everyone who is telling you that it was irresponsible to have more than 10 people at your family member's funeral if they died of coronavirus. Because that's what they were saying. People couldn't even have proper funerals for the family members because the risk of coronavirus was too much. You were going to infect everyone in that room, and then we were never going to get this virus under control. But all of a sudden, that doesn't matter anymore.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden. It's like magic. Now look here. People are going to be like, oh, well, you're being a hypocrite. And I'm not being a hypocrite. All these lockdown orders should simply be lifted. They should simply be lifted right now because they are being used politically. They're being used as tools of politicians to further political ends. This is not about safety. This is not about health. All right, if it was about safety and health, they wouldn't allow these protests to go on. That is a secondary concern. The main concern they have is control over you. They want to control you. They want to be able to tell you what to do. They know that they cannot control these crowds. That's their base. Those are the people whose votes they need. You know whose vote they don't need? The people protesting that they're losing their jobs. The people telling you that they want to go to work. These lockdown protests were not Democrats, and they were not going to vote for Democrats. So fuck them, right?
Yep.
That's what these politicians are thinking. Like, oh, we don't need their support. We don't need their votes. They're not Democrats and they're not voting for us. So fuck them. We're not going to let them protest and we're going to demonize them all they can. But when it's our voters protesting, then we'll let them do that. We'll let them do whatever they want because we don't want to alienate them.
Yep.
You fuckers, we'll alienate you all you want.
Yep. Turn the pandering up to 11, call all the lockdown protesters Nazis and terrorists and genocidal maniacs who are going to kill all the grandmas in the world. And
right? And here's the thing. The lockdown protests never got violent. Never got violent at all. Not a single building was burned to the ground. They didn't take over any city blocks. No one was shot and killed. And you know what they were called when they were protesting? They were called terrorists.
Mhm.
Like, these are domestic terrorists.
Yep.
Because they're armed. Like,
Right.
they're armed and they're attempting to intimidate politicians into giving into their demands. Like, oh, is that what makes you a terrorist? Is that what makes you a terrorist? Huh? Let's apply this equally then. Because I'm seeing a lot of rioters burning down buildings, right? I'm seeing a lot of that going around over these last few weeks. And none of all those people were peaceful protesters. None of them were terrorists.
Oh, yeah, I think that there was a media montage that I think I shared in one of our group chats of like 5 or 6 clips talking about the anti-lockdown protesters as being terrorists and all the stuff that you just said, and then like 5 or 6 clips with like literally shit burning in the background. Oh, these are mostly peaceful protests. Yeah, talking about shit like that. So
yeah. Spike in here says the spike concern didn't even resurface in the media until the president announced the return of his rallies. And ain't that the truth? Like, all of a sudden, I'm gonna start having rallies again. Oh, now big crowds are a bad thing. Now we can't have that. And I'm just kind of sick of this narrative that people are putting out there. Like, oh, there are a lot of white people allowed to protest and not get shot. Like, you know what happens when a bunch of white people have an autonomous zone and defy the will of the government? You know what happens to them? Waco happens to them.
Yep.
Right? The Bundy standoff happens to them. What did the Bundys even do? They took over an unoccupied forest building somewhere in the woods, somewhere that no one was occupying. They didn't occupy 6 blocks of a major metropolitan city, and one of them got shot for their efforts. Right? I'm old enough to remember that. I'm old enough to remember Democrats in the world calling those people vanilla ISIS.
Yep.
For daring to defy the will of the government, for wanting to graze their cattle on lands that they've traditionally been allowed to graze on in the first place.
Yep.
But those guys were terrorists. Those scary Bundy terrorists.
Yeah, I just sent you that super cut. So if you want to key that up and play it, we can do that.
Oh yes, I can do that. I'll have to pull that up.
But yeah, so I remember I remember the when the protesters at the Malheur Wildlife Reserve with Ammon Bundy and his crew, when they asked for supplies and everything, they came in, they were prepared for a long standoff, and it lasted longer than they were prepared for, and so they put out a call for donations, and people sent them boxes of dildos. And somehow that got through, but any legitimate donations were seized by the post office. So it really makes you wonder who was kind of working behind the scenes on that one.
Yeah, let's watch this video that you sent me.
Watch these images. Really just an ugly, dangerous scene at the state capitol in Michigan.
As we look at this extreme...
Ugly, dangerous. Nobody got shot. There was no violence there at all. Ugly and dangerous.
Group of people.
those pictures and those clashes really show the chaos.
And you're out there with guns?
I don't want to call them rallies. They're not protests.
These quote-unquote protests, I don't even think that that's the right word, because protests are supposed to be peaceful.
I'm not embarrassed to say that I was afraid.
It's not clear what they're demanding to infect other people, demanding to make other people sick.
That's
It's dangerous, and these people can take this home.
There was a bunch of stuff about the anti-lockdown protesters at the beginning of that.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, whatever.
Here, I'll.
Well, I guess it's not important.
I love how this guy is saying this is a peaceful protest. It's not generally unruly, as he's standing in front of a burning building.
Yeah.
It's like, what? You're literally standing in front of a burning building telling me, oh, this is all peaceful. No violence here. Nothing to see here. Please pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Yeah. It's what was it? From one of the Naked Gun movies, Leslie Nielsen's like please disperse. Nothing to see here. And there's like bedlam going on behind him.
I'm going to finish this.
It's a riot, what we're seeing right now in Minneapolis.
Any reasonable person would say we shouldn't be destroying other people's property, but these are not reasonable times.
And please, show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite.
Show me where protesters are supposed to be polite. In the First Amendment.
You saw that video too?
Yeah.
The guy eating ramen noodles.
It's in the First Amendment. Do you have the right to peaceably assemble? It's literally in the First Amendment.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you do have an obligation to be peaceful. Sorry, this is just a fact. You do not have the right to simply aggress against random people. Even if your cause is perfectly just. Like, I thought all those lockdown protests, I thought their cause was perfectly just. You know what I wouldn't have thought it would be just? If they had gone downtown and started breaking windows and burning down buildings. That wouldn't have been just. I would have been outraged had they done that. I would have been pissed off had they been going out and doing stuff like that. And I don't understand why it's not okay to be pissed off at people for random wanton destruction. Like, they're hurting your message. All right? This is your message is we're against government brutality. We're against police brutality and we want it to stop. Yes, on board, 100%. Let's do this. Also, we want to burn down random buildings and loot and burn and destroy. And like, you lost me there. Okay, can we go back to the first part? I liked that part. Let's do that. Let's just go back and do that instead. And can we please not make excuses for all the destruction you're
peaceful
doing? The beautiful thing is we're seeing citizens who are caring and concerned. They're hitting the streets.
Heartwarming to see so many people turn out peacefully.
You know, Brooke, I think this is a march, really.
But as they're coming off, it's peaceful. They're saying peaceful protest.
Across the country, it's bringing people together, community with unity.
People are risking.
Okay, I can't watch anymore because, yeah, you're absolutely right. This is absolutely ridiculous. And I can only take so much hypocrisy for so long. It's too much. Too much, man.
Yep. It's okay when we do it.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, if your concern really is health, if this virus is as bad as you've been saying it is, then you wouldn't be cheering on massive crowds of people marching up and down every metropolitan area in the entire country, right? We were I was led to believe when this whole thing popped up, this thing had like a 5 to 10% fatality rate, right? You remember back in those days when everyone's like, this is literally Captain Trips from the stand. We're all going to die. Like, just stay inside or the whole world. It's an apocalypse. I literally had a guy telling me that coronavirus was potentially apocalyptic. And that's why we needed to stay inside. Like, okay, I wish I could go back to that guy now and be like, okay, if it's apocalyptic, I want you to go out to the nearest protest in your area and start telling them that, right? Go downtown and say, hey, you guys need to go inside because 1 out of 10 of you is going to be dead in a couple of weeks because coronavirus is just that deadly.
Yep. Craziness.
All right. I think we'll wrap up there. I don't really have anything more to talk about. There've been a few shootings going on recently. There was that man in Atlanta who got shot outside of Denny's, tragic situation. And then I think it was today there was a shooting in New Mexico around a statue of some conquista down there. A lot of video coming out of that one. Seems like it was self-defense to me. Probably. The guy was literally attacked with a knife and a skateboard and then shot a guy who was attacking him. So seems pretty much self-defense, that one. But we're not going to get into all that right now. We have, 5 minutes? So we're just going to wrap it up here.
Yep.
All right. Anything you want to say before we call in that, Hobbs?
Next Monday, I think 5 p.m. Central Time, talking to Joe Jorgensen and some of the Boogaloo Boys. Should be good. It was supposed to happen last Friday, but we had a bit of a scheduling snafu, so we're going to be making up for it next Monday.
That should be a good one. We had Spike Cohen on a couple weeks ago. Now we're going to have Dr. Joe Jorgensen herself coming on the show. All right, everybody. We'll look forward to that one. We'll see you all later on the next Road to Liberty podcast. Good night.